Okay, so I was watching a video today on YouTube by a woman named Nicole Arbour that was titled Dear Fat People, in which she insulted, well, fat people. Now, as you can probably tell just by looking at me, I am a fat person. Now, she tried to claim that her video was actually done as satire and meant to be taken as comedy. The only problem she had, as far as I'm concerned, was that most of the people who watched her video were actually pretty pissed off. Now, from what I can tell, the reason so many of her viewers got so angry was because her video, the one she claimed was supposed to be for comedy and satire, wasn't actually funny. That it seemed more like a I hate fat people rant than it did a comedy routine. Now, I've seen a lot of videos that were made to counter her arguments, and I've seen comments and comment sections of people who supported her arguments. And quite frankly, those who supported them spent more time insulting people than actually talking about their health. Now, most of the people who made counter arguments to her arguments that she made in the video about how she was trying to help fat people not be so fat by ridiculing them and demeaning them were actually pretty accurate. Because most of them pointed out that all she was really doing was insulting people and that it wasn't very funny. Because what she was doing is something that people on the internet have termed, I believe, concern trolling. For those who don't know what that means, what concern trolling means, it is the practice of insulting or demeaning someone else by pretending to actually be concerned for them, whether you actually are or not. Primarily not, because if you are, it's not concerned trolling unless you're insulting. Now, this tactic is not only insulting, but it is also rather dishonest, especially if you have no concern for the people you're claiming to care for. And it makes the person who does it look like an idiot, because they're trying to hide their prejudices and their faux concern behind a mask of concern. And this dingbat made it even worse because she actually tried to make it about comedy and quote-unquote satire. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this, and I'm not even going to show her video because, quite frankly, I don't think her video deserves to be shown any more than it already has been. Anybody wanting to see it can go look for it themselves. It's called Dear Fat People. It's not hard to find. What I am going to do, however, is give my opinion on her video and her performance as primarily because as a comedian, she's supposed to be funny. Now, before I do this, though, I want to preface this with the fact that, obviously, looking at me, I'm a fat ass, and I weigh a little over 350 pounds, so I'm a really fat ass. But what she actually said about people wasn't what offended me, because I've spent most of my life dealing with people calling me a fat ass and making jokes about how the earth shapes when I walk, various things like that. None of that bothers me because people are going to be stupid whether you want them to or not. But the reason why I decided to do a video on this is because of something that, well, quite frankly, it has to do with her claiming that her video is satire and all that stuff. Now, there's been a number of comedians and comedians, both, who have made a decent living and even become famous for being insult comics and basing their careers around insulting people and stuff like that. You've got people like George Carlin, Don Rickles, Lisa Lampanelli. You've got all these kind of people who made their entire careers out of insulting, well, pretty much everybody. Now, the thing that differentiates people like George Carlin from Nicole Arbour is the fact that George Carlin did two things that she couldn't apparently do. One, he didn't pretend to be concerned for the people he was insulting. And two, he was actually funny. Now, the same can be said for others like Don Rickles and even Lisa Lampanelli. Now, I'm not all that big a fan of Lisa Lampanelli, but she is funny sometimes. Now, it would seem to me that Nicole is trying to create this I'm an insult comic routine. But the only problem is none of her routine so far that I've seen has been funny, because her timing sucks, the jokes fall flat, and probably the only people who actually like this stuff are people who enjoy insulting, demeaning, dehumanizing, and ridiculing people, which, in case you don't know, is generally considered a bad thing in this society anyway. Excuse me. Now, another thing that seemed to not have been taken into consideration is the fact that there are such things as food addictions. Now, the reason I say this hasn't been taken into consideration is because I've actually seen people make the argument that if someone close to you was addicted to alcohol or was addicted to drugs, would you be so kind and polite with them and say, you should be proud of who you are? Or would you show them tough love and try to help them quit their addiction? Well, the answer to that would be, I would probably try to help them quit their addiction. But see, here's the problem with that. You don't need alcohol or drugs in order to survive. You do need food. Now, given the fact that the foods we eat and stuff like that have so many chemicals and stuff in it, especially the fast food stuff and the cheap foods that we have access to, that can cause addiction behavior as well, it would seem people would be a little bit more sympathetic to people who have a food addiction. But of course they don't, because according to most of these dumbasses, anybody who's fat is just fat because they're too lazy to get off their fat fucking asses and do something. But there's also conditions and diseases that cause people to gain weight. I have a cousin myself who has a thyroid condition that was keeping her from losing weight, and she went to the gym regularly. I mean, on a daily basis. She walked 3 miles in the morning, went to the gym on a daily basis after she got out of her classes, and she still could not lose weight. She goes to the doctor to find out why she's not losing weight despite how much work she's putting in, and she finds out she's got a thyroid condition, which is keeping her from losing weight. And as someone else pointed out, you can't actually judge whether someone has a condition or not just by looking at them. So if your criteria for demeaning somebody is, hey, you're fat, you're lazy, you're pretty stupid. Now then, there's also something else that doesn't get considered, it would seem, and that's the fact that insulting someone to try to help them makes no sense whatsoever. 2 reasons. 1, if it is an addiction, you can't help that person until they're ready to help themselves. And 2, when you demean, ridicule, or just plain dehumanize somebody by turning them into a punchline or just flat out insulting them and calling them names, it doesn't exactly make them want to quit the addiction. In fact, it kind of drives them towards that addiction, because that addiction helps them deal with having someone that's close to them and someone they cared about treat them like shit on the bottom of their shoes. I don't understand why people like Nicole Arbour can't see this. I don't understand why her fans can't see this. But if I had to take a guess, I'm going to guess it's probably because most of them have never had to fight with a food addiction, whether it's eating too much, not eating enough. So that's my take on this. Basically, it was a stupid thing for her to do, not because her insults of fat people actually offended me, but because she wasn't funny when she did it. That's the biggest problem. In fact, the funniest stuff in the video that she did is stuff that has nothing to do with being fat. It's the jokes about like smoking, which are very, very brief. Those were funny. But her jabs at fat people just seem more like a bigoted rant covered in a disguise of comedy and satire in order to keep from looking like the asshole that she actually is. Well, that's all I have to say about that. And as you can see, I ain't playing this bitch's video. So I'm done, and maybe something else will come up that will give her something else to talk about. Who knows?